Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Friday Ramblings. We've got a special episode for you. This one's a bit of a sequel to an episode we'd previously done. In fact, this is one of those cases of this is what happens when you are a staff of one. And that is that you occasionally tend to let stuff slip through the cracks. I'd done a previous rambling on lost films. These are movies that no copy has been found for an extended period of time. And you would think, oh, you're talking about just like some, infamous indie movie or something. No, there's actually some big Hollywood movies and whatnot that are just gone. And there's various causes for it, mostly the fact that in the early eras of filmmaking, film was not preserved well. They didn't make huge amounts of copies. You have to remember, for my younger audiences here, things like home releases of stuff, DVD box sets, best of VHS tapes, didn't exist until really the last couple decades. And unfortunately, before that, film itself was expensive, and a lot of stuff they didn't make copies of. Or if they did, they only made copies short term for the sake of business. Show the studio the film was completed, proof for any sponsors that, hey, we know it only released in a couple theaters, and you guys, none of your reps noticed it, but we promised we did make it and release it. We used your money the way you intended to. See, here's your... But then after the sponsors watched it, or the investors, or, however the money people came into it, a lot of times the tapes were wiped. Or they were stored in a method that wasn't ideal, and the film decayed, or occasionally spontaneously caught fire because some of the chemicals used to make and treat the films were flammable, and they were not stored in temperature-controlled conditions. And I had intended to do a follow-up video about how the same thing occurred on television, as well as movies, but I never did it until today. It was one of those things where I thought about doing it so much, and because I didn't have nice staff members keeping detailed notes for me, because this is not a big mega production studio style channel, I just thought I had already done it. So we're going to correct this here today. Now, as I said, that is the basics of how film can be lost. Copies were not made at the time. Only a couple copies were made, and they degraded or were destroyed. Tapes were reused, a concept that was so prevalent that it actually has the term wiping. Yes, there is a term specifically for when studios and networks make a copy of a TV show and then reuse the tape, thus wiping out the copy of the original thing, because tapes were expensive for many years there. And again, most people didn't think they needed a copy for more than a couple months at a time. Now, you also have to remember, folks, here's another bit of trivia for you younger listeners here. Besides the fact that home release wasn't a thing, mostly because, again, the cost of making copies, but for the first couple decades or so of television, there weren't even reruns. Stuff was filmed live and went out there, and that was it. They didn't make copies because they figured nobody would want to watch it again. They're going to have something new next week. Why? Why copy it? The idea of reruns really didn't kick in until the later black and white television years, when iconic sitcoms like I Love Lucy were so well made that people legitimately wanted to see episodes more than once, and an effort was made to try this experiment, but even then it didn't become super popular and a standard until the rise of cable, and you had all these extra channels that needed cheap content. So the cheapest thing to do instead of making new content was buy the rights to broadcast the repeats of old shows. Those entire cable channels, that they don't make original content. All they do is show classics. Your TV Land, Me TV, you know. Heck, Comedy Central for years was, you know, they aired comedy movies and old Saturday Night Live, occasionally old stand-up specials that they could get a hold of. They didn't make their own original programming until they've been around for several years. Well, maybe longer, depending on if you want to count Comedy Central from the time they branded themselves Comedy Central or their predecessor channels. But that's a different story for another day. So that's some of your history of how TV got lost and why it got lost. Before we get into specific examples, though, we do want to give a shout out to the groups that are working to find some of this missing TV, and when they do find it, preserve the copies of it. Specifically, the Parlay Media Center. Now, the Parlay Media Center has had a few different names. Museum of Radio and Television, originally the Museum of Radio. They eventually renamed themselves after one of their founders, Mr. Parlay. UCLA also has a Film and Television Archive organization. So there's several others, and we're not going to name y'all, but we respect you all. You know? And of course the various fan organizations that do this as well. We'll touch on them in a little bit. Or rather, the idea that a lot of television survives because of fans, not just eventually once things like home VCR units became affordable and prevalent, that fans would record their favorite shows and eventually donated copies to groups like UCLA Film Archives and the Parlay Media Center. But sometimes that's, you know, that would stay only copies. Some of those fans even joined these organizations and help keep them running. Now, one of the other things that did work in the early days of recording for television is Kinescope. Now, basically, Kinescope was made, again, for short-term recordings. The idea was you would have the television playing the show, here's your TV box, and in front of the TV box, you would set an actual camera. So it wasn't a copy of the original film, but it was a recording of a TV playing the show. It was a relatively cheap way to do it, unfortunately, because you were recording to, you know, projector style film. You ran into that same problem of degradation and lack of quality on that original film because, again, it's a recording of a TV broadcasting it. It's not a copy of the original film, what is often called the master recording or master tape, depending on the decade and exactly how the stuff was filmed to begin with. You know, I throw that out there because you are going to hear about Kinescope later. It does show up. Sometimes Kinescope and the fact that one Kinescope copy managed to survive the decades, despite the odds, is the only reason we have some of this stuff. Even if it's not a complete perfect copy, even if it's just like, you know, a few minutes here and there, it's proof the show existed. It's a good starting point. So, you know, or props. So what are some of the things that are missing that you may care about? You may be astonished to hear are missing because after the fact they're considered historically important. Because we all know this is the bread and butter of episodes like this. You want to hear us talk about the good stuff. Now I will say my examples are going to be limited to American origination, with one exception, which will be our big finale. This is simply because, being American myself, this is the television I am most familiar with and thus can easily talk about. Several award shows from the 50s and 60s, such as the Academy Awards and the M.I.A. Awards, only survive in Kinescope format. This was mostly only due to overseas distribution, especially for the European TV audiences. All the tape broadcasts of the Academy Awards from 1966 onward, the first to be broadcast in color, do remain intact. Approximately half of the episodes of... Oh wait, hold on. Excuse me, wrong note there. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Yeah, no. We're good, okay. Sorry, my notes were a little blurring together here. Okay, approximately half the episodes of the 1957 syndicated cartoon Colonel Bleep are missing. Colonel Bleep was the first color cartoon series made for television, which is its historical significance. The entire master archive was stolen in the early 1970s and not recovered. The current collection is taken from tapes sent out to individual stations, only approximately half of which have been found. 60 episodes of the iconic Sesame Street are missing from the archives of Sesame Workshop. This list of lost episodes includes the debut of long-running cast member Linda and Oscar the Grouch's pet worm Slimy. Some of the episodes that they do have are from the show's German language version. However, there is hope that raw footage of some of the street scenes exists somewhere in the archives. The search goes on. In 1995, when Hallmark Cards acquired the catalog of the American animation studio Filmation, who was responsible for many of your iconic cartoons of the 60s and 70s, they converted all the studio series from the NTSC format, which is what's used in North America, to the PAL format, which is used in Europe. Hallmark claims that they discarded Filmation's original master tapes after they were converted. So in this case, many of those Filmation cartoons exist, but they are set up for European televisions, which broadcast in a slightly different style. However, in the age of modern media, that's okay because converting from PAL to NTSC is possible thanks to computer technology. Little of the first sitcom, The Mary Kay and Johnny Show, remains today. It was initially live and not recorded, but later in its run, kinescopes were made for rebroadcasting. Let's see, your actual number of this one is... Let's see, where is that note? Doop-a-doop-a-doop, doop-a-doop-a-doop. Let me see here. There we go. Yeah, there's actually only one complete 1949 episode in the Pele Media collection, and a few seconds from the show's last episode that still exists today. The show ran from 1947 to 1950. So, sadly, the earliest verifiable American example of the sitcom genre almost doesn't exist. The iconic Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, which started in 1953. It's an American institution, but you cannot watch every edition. Only 2 parades from the 1950s to the 1970s are still preserved, and the status for many telecasts prior to 1980 are unknown. There is a verified archive by NBC copy of the 1962 parade. I mean, we've only got about 40 years of a parade that's been running for 50, 60, almost 70 years. We're missing almost half the parades. Beat the Clock, an iconic 50s American television game show, involves people trying to complete challenges to win prizes while faced with a time limit. From March 1950 to July 1952, no live broadcasts of the show were preserved, with 2 exceptions: an episode from October 13th, 1951, and another from January 5th, 1952. The show was not regularly preserved until August 1952. Cavalcade of Stars, which would later be more famously called the Jackie Gleason Show, started in 1952. However, many episodes from the first 5 years were destroyed and do not exist, or if they exist, they are in fragmented format. Again, you would think something like the Jackie Gleason Show, but at the time, it wasn't even called the Jackie Gleason Show yet. It wasn't a big deal until decades later. The original show to be called the Goldbergs, not the more recent show that has been on TV and shows a nostalgic look back at the 80s, but the 1949 to 1956 comedy drama, which originally started in 1929 on American radio and was also adapted in a 1948 play, Me and Molly, and a 1950 film, The Goldbergs, as well as a 1973 Broadway musical. Sounds like a huge thing. Only the last 2 seasons survive intact. Sorry. If you want to watch the first 5 years, you're out of luck. Let's look up some other wonderfuls. And again, we're not going to cover every single thing here. We're just throwing out a few just to grab at you. The Match Game, one of the most famous game shows of the 60s that has been revived several times over the course of the last 6 decades. Panel game show style. About as famous as game shows get. Guess what? Only 11 NBC Network episodes survive out of the 1,752 episodes produced of its original 7-year run. Let me repeat that. Only 11 out of 1,752 episodes. That's not even... That's not even 1%. That's less than 1% exists today. On similar notes, we also have the original Jeopardy, which aired from 1964 to 1975, also has less than 1% of its episodes, 24 out of 2,753 still in existence. From 1966 to 1981, that edition of Hollywood Squares, only approximately 130 episodes, Mostly the 68 NBC nighttime version and the 71 to 76 syndicated episodes currently exist. NBC allegedly destroyed the remainder when it was announced that GSN acquired the rights to the Square episodes. Most of the episodes that do still exist are thanks to UCLA's Film and Television Archive. Let's Make a Deal's 80 to 81 run, produced in Canada, only has between 33 to 40 arable masters remaining, in addition to several home recordings. The remaining master tapes are largely missing or otherwise damaged beyond recovery. First daytime version of Wheel of Fortune from 75 to 89 is nearly destroyed through at least 1979, with King World representative stating in August 2006 that creator Merv Griffin's production company continued reusing tapes into 1985. Pat Sajak's debut as host in 81 and Vanna White's debut as hostess in 82 are some of the only remaining episodes thanks to the Pele Center for Media. Most other episodes of pre-1980 game shows are lost. Exceptions include the Pyramid game show, aka $10,000 Pyramid, $5,000 Pyramid, $100,000 Pyramid, depending on your year and the current rate of inflation that you're watching, as well as many episodes of of Hollywood Squares, the syndicated later versions of Let's Make a Deal, and some episodes of the syndicated Tic-Tac-Dough. NBC and ABC continued wiping their game shows well into the 70s and even as late as 1980. CBS abandoned wiping game show programs by 72, largely the result of their collaboration with Goodson Todman, the production company that made a lot of those game shows of that era. Soap operas are surprisingly well survived, mostly due to fan home recordings and the work of the production studios. Thanks to black and white kinescopes, certain episodes from going back as far as the 50s and 60s of things like Guiding Light and As the World Turns still exist. Most 63 to 70 episodes of General Hospital survived because the series was owned by Selmer Productions, who wanted archives for their own purposes. However, a few episodes from 70 to 77 were saved. Ryan's Hope premiered in 1975, several years before ABC began saving all of its daytime programming, but existed in its entirety. It was originally owned by Laban Mayer Productions. Thankfully, Days of Our Lives and Young and the Restless do have full archives, so fans of these iconic series could, theoretically, binge the entire run. Hope you're not doing anything for a few years straight. Make sure you hook up an IV. Those shows are long running. You're not going to have time to make food. Perhaps one of the worst hit in American broadcasting, though, is sporting events. Again, much like game shows, because there was always going to be another sporting event within the next day or two. A lot of this stuff just wasn't archived. Unfortunately, that even applies to the earliest championship games. As of 2011, 1968 Super Bowl II is the only Super Bowl without any surviving telecast recording. A nearly complete color tape of Super Bowl I was discovered in 2005, but was not aired until 2010. And portions of telecasts up through Super Bowl V are either missing or only exist in black and white. The currently running NFL Films, the league's official filmmaker, produced their own copies of the games for posterity. Similarly, all the telecasts of the NFL Championship games prior to the Super Bowl are believed to have been lost. Yep, that's right. Before the official Super Bowl that helped kick off the modern era of the NFL as we know it, the previous championship games that were played, you can't watch them. I'm sorry, football historians. You know, some of these games involve teams that, in one form or another, are still around today. You know, the oldest franchises in the current NFL, they're not there. You can't watch them. I'm sorry. It's crazy to think about. What surviving footage is of those games come from separately produced film that has been put together. The status of most regular season playoff games from the early years of television up to the immediate years following the 1970 AFL-NFL merger are also unknown. Some of the footage that has survived includes remnants of the 1972 AFC divisional playoff game between the Steelers and the Raiders that featured the iconic Immaculate Reception, one of the most famous plays in the history of American football. Thank God! As well as the inaugural telecast of Monday Night Football from 1970 between the Cleveland Browns and New York Jets, though several Monday Night Football games in the ensuing seasons were lost. A 1974 game that featured John Lennon being interviewed by Howard Cosell in the booth only survived due to a home video recording of the game. The game itself was wiped by ABC. In modern eras, the NFL has its own filmmakers, NFL Films, filming the game with its own equipment, thus preserving the telecasts for posterity and long-term archiving. Good on ya, NFL. The earliest years of the college Rose Bowl is gone or scattered. We do have the entire games of 69, 70, 72, and 73. However, the 58 edition only has the early minutes of the first quarter, the entire halftime show, and early minutes of the third quarter, along with the final 11 minutes of the game. 71 version only has the second quarter all the way to 49 seconds left in the game. Fortunately, every Rose Bowl game since 1975 exists in their entirety, thanks to archives being handled very nicely. You want to see World Series games before 1975? Sorry. 1955 World Series, only the first half of Game 5 is known to exist. 1960 version? Game 7 was found intact on Kinescope in December 2009 in the wine cellar of Pirates part-time owner Bing Crosby. Otherwise, we got nothing. Games 1 through 2 are preserved on Kinescope, while games 2 through 5 exist on the original color videotape from truck feeds for 1969's World Series between the Orioles and the Mets. And many more examples of fractured World Series. And here's one for you, for all you fans of the King of Late Night. I am sorry, but The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson only has 33 episodes of its original decade. There are individual fragmented minutes of some episodes from that decade that have been carefully preserved and famously made their way onto various best-of compilation tapes put out by Carson, but by and large, his first 10 years of late-night dominance do not exist anymore. And for the big finale, the show that perhaps has one of the most dedicated fan bases around the world. The only one we're going to talk about today that is not an American-based show. Show that has one of the most dedicated communities to constantly seeking out hopeful home video copies to fill in the archives. We are talking about Doctor Who. So, how bad is this? 97 of 253 episodes from the program's first 6 years are currently missing. If you want to do some quick math, that is a little over a third. Not quite half, but more than a third. Somewhere in the 40-ish percentile. These are primarily from seasons 3 to 5, leaving 26 story arcs, or serials, as they're called over in Britain properly, incomplete. Many more were considered lost until recovered from various sources, mostly overseas broadcasters. Fortunately, for archiving purposes, each of the 97 still missing episodes survives in audio form, recorded off-air by fans at home, so it's merely a matter of finding video footage so you can splice the video and audio together. Many episodes that exist in fragments have had photo stills and animated versions of the scenes spliced together so that the story can be told. Efforts to locate the missing episodes, as I said, do continue to this day, both by the BBC, that is the British Broadcasting Corporation, as well as fans of the series. Many missing episodes have had their visuals reconstructed, as we stated, when complete footage cannot be found. So, how bad is it? Well, as I said, it is the first several years that has the biggest chunk of missing. However, episodes or story arcs as recently as 1968 is missing in its entirety, as well as episodes from 69 missing in partial. There is, of course, also one unaired missing episode, Planet of Giants, which was originally recorded as 4 episodes. However, episodes 3 and 4 were later combined and reduced to form a single episode. This original 2-episode version of the back half of the serial is still lost. So, there you go, folks. That is your brief rundown of lost television broadcasts. Combined with our discussion of previous unlost film, what can we learn? Well, for those of you like myself who enjoy entertainment from all eras, it is nice to know that eventually, as the entertainment industries became a bigger deal, that more money was funneled into investing in archiving and preserving footage. As I said, sports historians, they know who won these games because of newspaper and radio documentation, but they would love to see the footage themselves. They want to watch the games. But you can't anymore. it's the best we can do. It makes history more awkward because your obvious best source isn't there. Now, some might say, well, is entertainment really that important? It is. Culturally, viewing what a society considers entertainment is one of the best ways to understand their values. You think I'm kidding? Go watch old movies. You can see adults smoking cigarettes all over the place because in the decades those were filmed, nobody thought about the health risks of smoking. Nobody even knew there was health risks of smoking for a while. It was just something people did. So in our fiction, they did it. But now that values have changed, smoking is not really accepted by the large majority of society, especially not in public, especially not in fiction where it could possibly influence children to pick up a bad habit. You don't see characters smoke anymore. They literally don't do it. A lot of times on TV, it's an FCC standard. It's a rule. Maybe occasionally a villain, but that's it. That's an easy example. But it is one. Still, as I said, that's why we are glad that eventually proper archiving was done across the board. And with the age of digital conversions and the internet, nothing is going to be lost. For reference, yes, folks, I myself do keep offline personal archives of all episodes of the Friday Ramblings, along with my game stream that can also be viewed on this channel on its own day. Because you can't trust one backup source. You should always have a main backup and a secondary backup in case something happens to the main backup. Because as I said, that's what happened to a lot of this film and TV. There was recordings. There was film of it. And it went away. Sometimes it burned up. Sometimes it got ripped apart by manhandling. Just decayed because it was exposed to too much air. It happens. So, remember, if there's something you treasure and it exists in audio-visual format, make a backup, then make a copy of that backup, and be careful how you store it, or else you might find some of your favorite Christmases, weddings, or birthday parties no longer existing. See you in 7.